Hello, developers. This is Josh, and you are watching Object Sanctuary, a series of short technical videos. In the beginning, shortly after the floods dried and Noah exited the Ark, there was hypertext, an exciting way for computers to communicate with each other. What was once reserved for mostly military and academic use had broken into the private sector, and the hype was palpable. The dot-com era began, and the gold rush was on. Who would build the next disruptive dot-com website? While the dot-com era led to a bubble, and the bubble inevitably went pop, technologists were looking for better ways to build and scale their online businesses. The idea of loading only part of a web page rather than reloading the whole thing began to grow in popularity. This led to two schools of thought in the web development world, the first being progressive enhancement, in which a web application could operate well even if the user disabled JavaScript in the browser, and the second school of thought being JavaScript first, and JSON as the vehicle to transfer data. I think we all know where this is going. As a side note, I encountered a jQuery plugin called PJAX in which I could load partial HTML on my webpage without having to fuss around with JSON data. Only HTML. While my work required a JavaScript first mindset, my inner idealist was happy for a brief time with making my personal projects at home using the progressive enhancement approach. As the 2010s progressed, component-oriented web frameworks skyrocketed in popularity. I took a 3-year sabbatical from full-time development work, but watching from the sidelines was not always a pretty sight. JavaScript concepts and innovations that were cool today became outdated the next day. Sometimes JavaScript and TypeScript code written in the last few years is unusable today without a major overhaul. At first I thought this was the necessary consequence to acceleration in innovation, but now I'm convinced it was not. Instead, the front-end development world began to usher questionable sophistications that, much like microservices for back-end development, mutated into resume-oriented development, instead of a serious consideration for the right tools for the right job. Then, Next.js 13 happened. Developers realized that maybe rendering on the server wasn't as expensive as they thought it would be. This left some PHP developers feeling vindicated after nearly a decade of being told they were outdated. To be fair on the React community, the idea of JavaScript and JSX components being rendered on both the server and the client has its merits. But after a decade of considering server-side rendering old, it felt just a little silly to make server-side rendering look like the new cool thing, when many developers have been doing so since the Web 1.0 era. This leads to my question: what have we done? I think it is time for us, developers, myself included, to ask if we are using the right tools for the right job. I write code for interactive web applications to this day, making AJAX calls and storing most of the state in the browser. And I've encountered tools in front-end development that I consider an absolute treat to use. In fact, I expect to share about them in future presentations. But the point remains: do we really need a JavaScript first solution every time, with all the responsibilities and maintenance that it brings? Or would rendering on the server side work perfectly fine? Remember, our end users don't care what web framework we use or what sophistications we employ to get the job done. They just want something that works and is fast enough. Sometimes they don't notice or care that a web page was reloaded as long as it didn't get in their way. I do believe that it is possible that some solutions do not require so much sophistication. It is very possible to handle user state and render HTML efficiently on the server side, and, if needed, to render only partial HTML where reloading the entire page would be too expensive. It depends on the use case. Here's a JavaScript library that I recommend if you want to accomplish this. It uses HTML attributes to accomplish AJAX calls, and your server can return partial HTML to replace the portions of the page where needed. Obviously, if you need to share data to other parties, such as vendors and mobile apps, then this is probably not a fit for your situation. I would say that if page interactivity is low to medium, then HTMX could save you hours, if not days, by reducing front-end complexity. A build process is not required to use HTMX, and you don't even have to use HTMX at the expense of using other tools. You should be able to use HTMX alongside anything you want. It can be adopted incrementally. This does not come without any quirks or trade-offs. For example, some developers are not going to like some of the extended HTML attribute syntax. Also, if you are using an interpreted language like Python or Ruby and the server is not provisioned with enough hardware power, then the user experience could be noticeably slower than a single page application that loads as many expensive queries up front as possible. Perhaps you want finer grade browser side interactivity. Perhaps you wish to offload some state responsibility back to the browser. Then I recommend taking a look at Alpine. Like HTMX, Alpine plays nicely with other JS frameworks, has a data store for browser-side state, doesn't require a build process if you don't need one, and can be incrementally adopted. If the use case fits, you could use both HTMX and Alpine in the same page, but I don't recommend doing that unless you know what you are doing, and more importantly, why you are doing it. I recommend the book Hypermedia Systems. Hypermedia doesn't have to be just HTML or JSON. It could also be XML, which has been used for thin native mobile clients. This enables rapid changes to the user interface without needing to update the App Store, albeit at the cost of dependence on a constant connection to the internet. I also recommend looking into this article about hypermedia-driven applications. Thank you for watching the first of what I hope to be many presentations. What do you think about the state of front-end development? When do you think we should have thick clients versus thin clients in our browsers? Feel free to drop your comments. Until next time then.